Hello, so today we're joined by Leon Tribe, who you may know as the Practical Diabetic online or from his blog. Leon is a diabetes advocate, public speaker, writer and trained physicist based in Sydney, Australia. Leon was originally misdiagnosed with type 2 before being correctly diagnosed as type 1 LADA a couple of weeks later. Now, Leon runs the Practical Diabetic website, a monthly type 1 meetup in Sydney, a brilliant Etsy shop, and is also a member of DDoc. Most recently, he attended the ATTD conference in Berlin, which is the Advanced Technologies and Treatments for Diabetes conference. So welcome, Liam. Bright eyed and bushy tailed going on for you to Diabetes Chat. How are you?
I'm well. It wasn't too bad getting up this early, but yeah, I don't sleep too much, so that helps. But no, I'm really well. Life is good.
Excellent. So we're just gonna just basically chat for the next hour or so. So I've broken up into sections. We'll start with a little bit of an introductory section where we'll get to know you just a little bit, just some quick get to know you questions. We'll move on to chat a little bit about your diagnosis and your sort of diabetes journey before chatting a bit more in depth about the advocacy work you've been involved in. So myself and Mary will sort of take turns to ask questions. So let's get started if you're ready with some introductory questions.
Yeah, go for it.
So the first one is, what is your occupation?
So I work in IT. Although you're quite right, I did physics degree many years ago and started a PhD, which I never finished. But yeah, these days I'm in IT. Sell Microsoft software basically. So I'm in pre-sales for CRM software. So customer relationship management software that Microsoft produce, but then our company resells it on. And that's the day job. Is sort of technology and IT and showing people how to use it to its best ability.
Excellent. Okay, so we've got some more diabetes related questions now. So if or when you finger prick, how often did you change the lancets?
The only time I finger prick, so when I put a Dexcom on, it'll often read low, and it's constantly alarming, right? So I run CAM-APS, and it'll just constantly read as low. It's not low, but for some reason it does. That's the only time I finger prick. So maybe once a month, just so I can recalibrate CAM-APS and stop it from doing the low alarms. I've never changed the lancet in 6 years.
Yeah, it's called recycling. That we like to ask that question to tell if our guest is lying or not, because it's a good way to tell someone's telling the truth.
What's ridiculous is in the diabetes cupboard, right? Because I got the inevitable cupboard full of supplies. I've got hundreds of these lancets, which I'm never going to use, right? Literally, I got boxes of these lancets.
They're useful when friends come over, though, Leon, aren't they? Like if they need their blood sugar checked and they're worried, and you're like, oh, let me change the lancet.
I have done that. I've done that party trick where I sort of handed around the lancets.
Yeah.
And I make them do it manually, right? With that, they'll like grab the lancet and they'll jam it into their own finger.
Oh!
It's not. I won't share lancet units. So I make them suffer a little bit.
It's just like going into triage in the hospital.
Yeah, that's it. Bang, right? Or the old machine that sort of shoved it down, like the little guillotine machine that they used to have.
Exactly. Oh, sorry, I interrupted.
Bit of a cruel party game.
They get curious. They say, well, you can do it, but you're going to have to jam your finger. And they're all squirmish, right? Because they're not used to it. Whereas, certainly me, I just go bang, right? Get the blood out. But, they're all squirmish and they prick their own little finger, and some of them go really deep and it just pulls out. It's quite hilarious. Morbid party game, quite right.
Okay, so we want to have a bit more of a more serious question now. Are you hypo and hyper aware?
This is something I'm still sort of learning. So I've only needed insulin for a bit over 12 months. So I'm still sort of learning that. Hyper aware, yes. So I can always tell when I'm high. because obviously I've sort of had that longer. Hypo, I don't hypo a lot, if at all. So I'm still sort of getting used to that. There's been some times when I've been working and I've gone, I feel a bit shaky. I feel a bit sort of empty in some ways. And then I'll look and I'll be sort of in the mid threes on our scale. So I'm starting to understand what a hypo is, but to be honest, I don't hypo a lot, and I'm not entirely sure why.
Well, I think that we'll probably get on to a bit more about your story. It'll be really interesting to hear a bit more about that, actually.
Yeah.
So obviously you don't really you don't hypo very often, but if you do, or when you do, what would be your go-to hypo treatment?
I've got jelly beans secreted in the, because when I get the low alarms, it's when the Dexcom sensor goes low, right? So the Dexcom sensor does the false lows. And so what I've got is in the pillows, right, around the head, so in the pillow in the bed, sorry, I've got a packet of jelly beans. So because otherwise it wakes up my wife, right? So if the alarm goes off, if the false hypo alarm goes off, I've got the jelly beans in the pillow, so I can just pull it because I'm half asleep, groggy. I can just pull out the little Ziploc of jelly beans and just chug the jelly beans to send my blood sugars up to get rid of the false alarm until the morning. So that's the sort of hypo treatment. Yeah, in the pillow, literally in the pillowcase. And I've got those sort of around various. I've got some in the car and stuff like this. But yeah, that's the secret. That's the hypo snack of choice is the jelly beans. It's quite fun. It's quite fun to have a sort of midnight jelly bean snack. I quite enjoy it.
I love it. Also very considerate as well to make sure you don't wake up your other half as well. That's lovely.
Because the Dexcom alarms, it's just so it's buzz, 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 buzz. It's buzzing the whole time.
Okay, so besides, of course, the secret jelly bean stash in the pillow, what is there another thing that you like about diabetes?
What do I like about diabetes? It was a positive thing. I know people. That sounds strange, right? Because it's a chronic disease and all. But for me, it was actually a really positive thing. When I got diagnosed, I wasn't particularly healthy. I was eating a lot of garbage food. I just wasn't particularly thinking about what I ate or my health in any real way. But that had to change when I got type 1. So I got a lot more aware of the food I was eating. It became a lot healthier. So for me, the what's good about type 1 is just that it's had that change in me. It's allowed me to think about my health and as I say, the food I'm eating, about nutrition, and just be a sort of a healthier individual. So it's been a positive move. I'm quite happy not to have it, but it's been more positive than negative, certainly. Hello?
Can I jump in as well and say, what about your family too, Leon? Did your diagnosis, was it a positive thing for them too, or just you, or because it affects the whole family, doesn't it?
Yeah, overwhelmingly they've been very supportive. They kind of just rolled with it. They've been pretty good in that regard. They just kind of accepted. I've got 2 kids, and they kind of accepted Daddy has this thing, and they've grown up with it over the last 6 years, and they're sort of they're pretty educated on type 1 now, because obviously I'm learned a lot, and I tell them about it. But it's I'm not sure it's a positive thing for the family, but certainly they've been very supportive, and they haven't. I see on the forums people sort of have quite a lot of frustrations at home with their partners and understanding, etc. Mine have been pretty good. I'm pretty It's been they've certainly been very supportive. It's been good in that regard.
Cool. Tony, are you still there? Have we lost you a wee bit? Maybe we've lost Tony.
I think we've lost him, Mary. I just seen a tweet come from him that says he's lost his Wi-Fi connection just now.
All right, well, I'll carry on then. Sure.
I thought my answers were just sort of leaving the conversation flat. I'm going, oh God, what am I saying?
I just saw the little blue circle, Leon, and I wasn't sure like what that meant, and I thought it looked different to mine. So, yeah. So, do you love or hate the smell of insulin, Leon?
I like it. So originally I'm from England, right? I was born in the UK. I came to Australia when I was sort of 11, 12 and did high school here. But it reminds me of England, the smell of insulin, because
really?
I don't know if you still have it. There used to be a product called TCP.
Yes.
It's it's antiseptic.
Yes.
And it's a similar phenol type smell. It's not dissimilar. So it kind of reminds me of TCP. It reminds me of
So
my childhood.
Nickname for TCP that it's like the letters stand for something, but I won't say it on air. But yeah, it doesn't go down. It doesn't go down well. No.
But yeah, it's the smell of it. Yeah, that sounds again a bit strange, but yeah, it's a smell from my childhood. It's not the smell of my childhood. I wasn't a sickly child by any means, but no, it was a smell of my childhood. So yes, I quite like the smell.
Yeah, I love that association. Now it'll probably stick in my head now every time I was going to say TCP. I was going to say what we call it. It's Comcast. If the kids they see it coming and they're like, "Oh gosh, Daddy's got a sore throat." Oh my gosh, yeah. What's the one thing you don't like about diabetes?
What's one thing I don't like about diabetes? Probably the ignorance out there. There's a lot of people that just don't have access to good quality information about their disease. That hasn't been made a priority in society, and there's people that are unnecessarily suffering because they don't have good information. But they don't have information about the technologies that are available. They don't have good information about what diabetes is and what it isn't. And I think that causes a lot of problems. So that's probably the one thing I don't like about diabetes is,
I agree.
The ignorance that's out there amongst people that have the disease and the people who have the disease and their preconceived notions of it.
I agree. Do you think it's... No, I'm not going to ask that question. I was going... Yeah, I agree. But it's a whole learning process. I think you don't know till you know. And then that Maya Angelou kind of saying is like, when you know better, do better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Tony is in the room, but he's not. Oh, there he is. Tony, can you talk?
Yeah. Can you hear me loud and clear now?
Yes.
Yes. Welcome back.
Sorry about that, guys. I have no idea what happened. It seemed to drop out, and then it said I was co-hosting, but I couldn't speak, so I'm not sure what happened.
I can't make you co-host again, so I don't know. But you can at least speak.
That's fine. No worries. It's just Twitter gremlins, I think.
Yeah.
So I think we're just at the last sort of getting to know you question before we get into a bit more detail. Another sort of fun one. So if you're on a deserted island, what 3 things would you take? And you've got all your equipment that you need, all of your diabetes related tech.
What would I take? I'd take a copy of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, one of my favorite books. I would take... Can I take Alexa? So because I want music. I want music as well. So I think that would be important. Is that okay to take Alexa for the music? Oh, have I lost you?
Yeah, we'll totally pretend there's electricity. Okay. Yeah.
So an iPod. If we go back to the old school, right? So an iPod. And what would be the third thing? I think the third thing would be food related. So it'd have to be some kind of food, which probably cola bottles. An infinite supply of cola bottles. Because I love the cola bottle candy.
Sugary or plain?
I don't eat sugar-free candy.
No, I don't mean sugar-free. I mean sugar-coated.
That's just evil.
No, I mean
the sugar-coated. Yeah, the fizzy-coated ones. Yeah.
The fizzy ones, and I like the soury ones as well.
Yeah. So the ones that got the coating on, because if you want plain ones, you sort of suck them in your mouth for a while and it dissolves, and you got the normal ones anyway.
Yeah.
So you're covered on both fronts.
Exactly, and I think the fizzy ones last a bit longer, or the soury ones last a bit longer because you are going through the whole tastes rather than chumping them down. That's me anyway.
Rather than just a quick swallow of it.
Excellent. So, thanks for that, guys. So we're now going to move on to chat a little bit about your diagnosis now, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
As we sort of briefly covered in the intro that you were originally misdiagnosed with type 2.
Yes,
so then if we could maybe take you back in time now to before that initial misdiagnosis. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what life was like then and what symptoms you had before that incorrect diagnosis.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, there's a couple of things happening in my life. I was doing IT delivery back then. So I was a solution architect on a major project for a university, one of the big universities here in Sydney. And, it was sort of, long hours in a basement, basically, to a large extent. But I was eating a lot of rubbish food. So the university had a 2-for-1 on sports drinks. So I was drinking sort of these big sports drinks, full sugar. Every morning I'd have those and a bacon sandwich. Yeah, I mentioned my diet was garbage, rubbish back then. that was a typical morning. So yeah, so I'm eating this garbage food, and I was just noticing that I was just really achy, constantly exhausted. I'd and don't tell the client this. I hope, and they're probably not listening. I'd sort of sneak away for an inverted commas meeting, and just find a quiet room and have a sleep for half an hour, sleep for an hour, because I was just so exhausted constantly. I was getting what's called alopecia areata, which is little circles of hair disappearing, just like patches of hair just going away. So you got these bald patches on your head, about the size of a sort of I'll translate for England like a 50p piece or a 10p piece. So my eye prescription, because I'm short-sighted, was going weird. So there's all these sort of weird symptoms happening, which didn't mean a lot to me. I just thought, okay, I'm getting old. The wheels are falling off the old body. That's the way it is. I couldn't go upstairs. My joints were really achy. So getting up and downstairs, I was really having to use a handrail to help pull myself up. And then because I was sort of an advocate for the product as well, right? So my advocacy in diabetes, I've learned a lot because I'm also an advocate for the software that the software that I work with is also a product that I sort of do advocacy for in the real world. So I've got a blog which covers the product, which covers CRM software and things like this. But I was speaking at a conference about 600 miles north of Sydney, a place called the Gold Coast, and it was just getting really bad. I was in terms of my symptoms, I was up at this conference, and I was having to pee every half hour, and it was like a full bladder pee. It wasn't like a phantom. Oh, I need to go. Oh, no, there's nothing happening here. Full bladder every half hour, and that's just bizarre. I was getting rashes in funny places, and if you know, you know. And that was just bizarre. And I'm thinking, I've got to present on stage for an hour, and I've got to pee every half hour, and I was permanently thirsty. So it's permanently thirsty. Again, no energy. But I did the presentation, and I managed to get through it without, peeing on stage, which is positive. But then, I sort of got on. That was sort of the last day. I think I was the last presentation at this conference, right? So so I did the presentation. We went out for pizza. In retrospect, probably not ideal when I'm in a what was, I now realise, a DKA state, or we're approaching it. But we all went out for pizza afterwards. I'm gobbling pizza, really thirsty. So just unquenchable thirst. It's quite amazing. And then I get on the plane home, right? Because it's so far away, I wasn't driving on the flew plane home. But I knew enough about diabetes to know that if I'm really thirsty and I'm peeing a lot, it's probably some form of diabetes. So I got home, I said to my wife words which I never say, which is, I think I need to go to a doctor. And it just so happens that the doctor we often go to also specialises in diabetes. So I said, yeah, let's go to him. And so we went to the GP, and he did a blood test, a urine test. And even though it'd been 12 months, I'd been fasting for 12 hours. My blood sugars were still around sort of 15 in our scale, so about triple what they should have been. And he says, okay, so you're going to go to the hospital now. And you don't go home. Just go straight to emergency. Don't dawdle, and tell them what's happening. Right. So he was quite concerned, right, because he saw that I was in some kind of DKA state. And the hospital sort of put me in bed. They gave me an IV drip to rehydrate me. And yeah, they never picked up that I was type 1. They sort of, I think, saw a well-rounded gentleman, sort of in middle age, or in his at that time sort of early 40s, and they just sort of stamped me with the type 2 label. It was actually my GP who I followed up with a couple of weeks later, who said, "You know what? Let's get the autoantibody test done. I'm not sure this is right." And so he found out that I was type 1 LADA, and that was good, because I was sometimes it's easy to think, oh, well, it doesn't matter, right? So type 1 LADA and type 2, they're treated in a similar way. But I was planning to getting lap band surgery, bariatric surgery, because of the remission rates, right? So that's I was planning to go under major surgery because of that misdiagnosis. There's also subtleties in medication. You don't want to be messing with certain medications as a type 1, which are useful for type 2s. So I was very glad that my GP was a lot sharper than what the hospital was at picking it up.
Oh, that's quite a whirlwind. It's been just such a big shock to go through all of that in such a short period of time. So what happens, post the incorrect type 2 diagnosis that sort of spurred you on to go back? What was it that sort of caused the sort of re-diagnosis, if you like?
Yeah, it was just a follow-up with the GP. So the GP had scheduled a follow-up a couple of weeks later, and he saw the results, and he just didn't, for whatever reason, I don't know what it was, he just didn't feel it was right. He went, let's get the autoantibody test done. So he got the antibody test done. He just did it off his own bat. It didn't feel right. And thankfully, as I say, he's a doctor that had an interest. He wasn't an endocrinologist, but he had an interest in diabetes. And so he got the antibodies test done, and then I was off the scale for GAD. We tested 3 in Australia, 3 antibodies, and I was in the thousands for all of them. They're supposed to be like 15 or under. So well and truly type 1. And type 1 LADA. And I was told I'd have a few months before I'd need insulin. It was 5 years in the end. So because I was told a few months, I just learned everything I could about type 1, about managing it, read everything, read even Dr. Bernstein, I read his book, I read anything I could that I could get my hands on. Sort of learn about the disease.
So can you maybe chat a little bit about LADA, for people who may not know what that is and how that's distinct from type 1?
Yeah, and this is a bit of a controversial subject. I wrote a blog about it a few weeks ago on this subject about, is LADA separate? So LADA, so how it presents, so the difference is how LADA presents to what would we consider typical type 1 diabetes. So if we think of the stereotype, and I know not every type 1 falls into this, but the stereotype is type 1 is diagnosed early in life. We actually know type 1 can be at any age, but this is sort of, I'm talking about the classic stereotype type 1. So type 1 can be diagnosed early in life, generally from diagnosis when the person is sick, because they're in sort of semi-DKA or they're in DKA. The progression to insulin dependence is of the order of weeks, rather than months or years, and then they're on insulin. With type 1, with LADA, it's much slower progressing. It's later in life, so it's latent autoimmune disease in adulthood. So for me, I was diagnosed with type 1 at 43, which, I say type 1 can be any age. So I was 43, and then it was 5 years before I needed insulin. So it was only at 5-year point that my HbA1c was sort of leaving the 5s and heading into the 6s. Again, I'm not sure if these units, hopefully people can convert the HbA1c and the blood units if I'm getting the wrong units. But basically, I was going out. After 5 years was only when I started going sort of outside of the normal HbA1c range. So that's when I started going on the insulin. But it's a much slower progressing disease. Now, there is a school of thought that LADA is simply type 2 diabetes. So there's stage two, not type 2, stage 2 diabetes. So there's stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 when you start getting on insulin. And so there's this concept of stages. So whether bladder is distinct from type 1 or it's just early detection of type 1, there's still a bit of a debate. There's not the academics still haven't worked that one out. But in essence, it's a slower forming progression of what we'd normally expect of type 1. So it'll go from diagnosis through to insulin dependence over literally months and years. There's people that I've met which went 10 years from diagnosis. So they had tested positive for the antibodies. It still took 10 years before they needed insulin, and even then it was maybe just basal. They didn't need it to bolus food. They just needed sort of a basal insulin just to keep their levels averagely low, that kind of thing.
So for a lot of people who have type 1, that's obviously quite different and was seen quite unusual. So how was it treated during that period of time? So for you, during that 5-year period before you were insulin dependent, how was it treated?
So various type 2 drugs, and this is one of the things which frustrates me significantly, is certainly for LADA, there's a lot of drugs which are labelled as type 2 and are therefore subsidised if you're type 2, which are not subsidised if you're type 1. Certainly in Australia, we've got a not dissimilar health system to the UK, so I imagine it's similar in the UK. But yeah, so I was on metformin. I was sort of encouraging my endo for me to get onto the incretin mimetics, so drugs similar to Ozempic, so those kinds of drugs, so Trulicity, Ozempic. So the gliptins, I was using those to slow down the loss of the beta mass. There was some evidence that the beta cells didn't quite sort of get destroyed as quickly if you're taking an incretin mimetic. So discussing with the endo, I was taking those initially in pill form, and then I was on Ozempic proper just prior to going on insulin, and then supply became really hard. It became really hard to find that drug. So I sort of just gave up on it. The other thing, it was costing me about £70 a month to get Ozempic, because it's, as I said, it's considered a type 2 drug. It's not subsidised at all, and that's, for us anyway, that's very expensive. So it's for the cost factor and for the fact that I was now on insulin, and I don't need to preserve the beta mass so much anymore. I sort of gave them away. But yeah, it was incretin mimetics and metformin were the primary treatments.
And during this time, did you monitor blood glucose levels? Were you sort of finger pricking, or how did that work?
Yeah, no, I was in those 5 years I was on a CGM. Certainly after I think the first 6 months, year, I was, and there was no subsidy for that. I was basically buying them off eBay and using them. And yeah, there was a thriving hacker community on the Dexcoms to make them last longer than the prescribed time. So I was making good use of that as well. I could get about 3 weeks out of a Dexcom sensor, and the people had hacked the transmitters so that they wouldn't expire either, and you could re-battery them. And so I was making full use of all that. And so I was monitoring with CGM, and that's really useful. It's for type 2s, and I think the academics, etc., are starting to cotton onto this, that being able to see what your blood sugar is doing when you're taking in food, so you understand so measuring it before and 2 hours after doesn't tell you what's happened in terms of the spike, how big the spike is. But having that CGM feedback is just really useful to see what foods are more problematic than others or harder to manage than others. I was using CGM. I was using CGM there pretty much. Yeah, I've been using CGM for probably, I'd say, about 5 years now.
So obviously you transitioned onto insulin pens first. So how did the decision come about that you should move on to insulin pens, and what was that like for you?
Yeah, so I'd set a line in the sand that I didn't want my HbA1c. If I say an HbA1c is 7%, does it make sense, or am I using the wrong units?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Okay,
we're multilingual. We're still multilingual over here, Leon.
Okay, thank you.
We work with both. He's like, we're new money, old money. all the
Yeah,
stuff.
so blood sugars I can convert, but HbA1cs I'm not as adept at converting it. So as one of my early blogs that I wrote, I'd sort of done I'd looked at like 30 academic papers, because railing against this concept that every spike does you damage, right? So people go there, every spike you do does you damage. You got to go low carb. You can't eat anything that sends you above, 100, the Americans are 140, right? So about 7.8, 7.9, something like that. And I thought that doesn't make sense, because I read Bernstein, and Bernstein says that your body recovers, your nerves can recover over time. So I'm thinking, well, okay, so you have the spike, but your body's going to heal straight away if it's only an isolated spike and it's not a persistent sort of wearing down of the body. So I looked at all these papers, I looked at about 30 papers, and I was right. There was no evidence. There's no scientific evidence that one spike does you damage. It's a sustained highs, but then they had sort of measures by HbA1c and other measures to say, and you probably should avoid going over this level. And by that, I'd concluded that if I could stay below 7, that's good. If I could stay below 6.4 without getting hypos, that was better. And so that was my benchmark. That was my line in the sand. And if you go to practicaldiabetic.com, you can find that paper, you find that article, you can read it. If that works for you, fantastic. And so pretty much until about a year ago, I was hitting that target. I was below 6.4. I was happy. And then the last couple of readings, they just started skyrocketing. It went up to 6.6, I think it was, and 6.8. And I thought, okay, no, this is no good. And so I met with my endocrinologist, and they'd come to the same conclusion, right? Because I'd sent them the full reports that I was generating. And I said, look, I think I need to move on to insulin. He went, yep, let's get you on the pens. And so I did that for about a week, the MDI. So I was doing the multiple daily injections. So I was getting the Levemir, I was putting it in, putting the units in, and we had no idea about the units I needed to put in. So I was trying different levels and just sort of upping it, trying to bowl some meals. And frankly, I was rubbish at it. I was just absolutely garbage at trying to manage my blood levels with injections. I was just finding it a lot of hassle and not a lot of benefit. And because I've had this 5-year run at this point, I knew I could loop. I knew I could. Looping wasn't an issue. I was already using the CGMs. I'd already set up Night Scout, which is a great way to get your blood glucose levels online. So you can use it just to manage your CGM. You don't need it for looping as such. But I was very aware of the looping technology. So I think it might have been 2 weeks. After a week or two, I went on to looping, and I've never stopped, because I was just so bad at MDI. I was just no good at it. I couldn't control my levels at all, whereas the loop just handles it all. I'm so much happier on looping.
So talking to looping now, so I'm aware that you've used both open source solutions as well as commercial loops. Could you discuss the different types of systems that you've used and your decision to sort of move between these, and sort of what the pros and cons you've experienced of them are?
Yeah, for sure. So the first system I used was Libre 2 with an Omnipod. So I had the Omnipods, which are the little sort of tubeless pumps that you put on your arm, and they last for a few days, and you throw them away. And I'd hacked the Libre 2. So officially the Libre 2 is a flash sensor, but you can actually hack them to be continuous, right? Because they are passing the information onto the phone continuously because of the alarms. For the hypo and for the hyper alarms, they need to pass the blood glucose onto the app in the phone. It's just the app in the phone, the official app doesn't do anything with the data. It just, if it doesn't trigger an alarm, it throws it away.
It does now in the UK, Leon. They've opened it up in the last week and a bit, maybe. Just UK.
So yes, so I was using a grubby hack, and I didn't worry about the fact that it was sort of a grubby hacked loop, because I still had some pancreatic insulin production, right? So I knew that even if the loop, turned off a lot, or misbehaved a little bit, then my own body, although it was, obviously I was compromised, I could still sort of handle how it went. And so I was using that for a while, and that was working fine. And the other problem we had in Australia was there was no subsidy, or there was no real subsidy for CGMs. And so CGM, you were paying, like basically full price for the CGMs. You're paying full retail price. even as a type 1. And so I was sort of hanging out, using trials, and as I say, buying stuff on eBay and stuff like this. But then the subsidy came in for the Dexcom, so I literally cried the day they announced that. I didn't realise how much emotion I've been holding back on that. And then Dexcom got subsidised, and so I started using Dexcom. So I went from the Libre 2 and the Omnipod. I went to initially Dexcom and the Omnipod. The problem I've got with the Omnipod is I use a lot of insulin. I'm quite insulin resistant, so I'll be using sort of 100 units a day of insulin, right, which is a good whack. Much more, I told that to type 1s and they go, how much? You went from 0 to 100? I went, yeah, pretty much. And the problem with the Omnipods is they can only hold, I think it's 200 units. So I never get the full 3 days out of the Omnipod. So I eventually, I was initially using Dexcom and the Omnipod, but it's a hassle because you can't refill Omnipods. They only got 200 units, so I wasn't getting the full life out of them. So I moved to the Ipso pump. So the Ipso pump, you can fill up the cartridge. The problem with going to the Ipso pump is you cannot open loop. You can't use Android APS or any of these on the Ipso pump. So whereas before I was using Android APS, that had to stop when I went to the Ipso pump. But what the Ipso pump's got is Cam APS, which is out of Cambridge University. So it's another looping app. And I found, in terms of comparison, I found it to be as good as Android APS, for me anyway. I've found that the performance is similar. So in terms of, and this is one thing that a lot of type 1s don't realize with the loops, that if you get the bolusing wrong, so if you under bolus for your food, the app will soak it up, right? So if you have to be within approximation, but the algorithm will just go, oh, you still need a bit more insulin. I'll just top it up for you. I'll just sort of manage it. And I was getting similar response out of Cam APS as with Android APS. The big advantage was I tended to micromanage Android APS more because you have the ability to control more. I was sort of looking at the numbers and I was tweaking stuff, whereas Cam APS takes care of all that. So I'm in terms of management, it's Cam APS is just really easy, right? There's only so much you can sort of do with it, and it handles the rest. So I've been really happy with the move. That's not to say I won't go back to Android APS. It's a brilliant system, and anyone can set it up. You don't need to be, I'm in IT, but you don't need to be in IT to set up a system like that. But yeah, at the moment I'm very happy with Cam APS. I've still got enough insulin production on board that I actually don't bolus at all. I'm running full closed loop. So I literally put the pump on and I do nothing. I don't bolus. It just handles, it does everything. The only thing I do is do the set changes, right? So I set out, I change the insulin cartridges, I change the cannula set every 3 days. And that's literally all I do. The rest of the time, I'm not really, other than for advocacy purposes, I'm not really thinking about diabetes. In terms of food, I'm eating I eat sensible foods, I eat lowish carb foods. But I don't need to bolus. I've never bolused on this Cam APS system. I don't need to. It handles it fine. I've got an HbA1c of 5.6.
I'm really fascinated by that, Leon. And you use there's no amount that's like right or wrong amount. Did you have to bolus on Android APS then? Did you say or no?
No, I wasn't really bolusing there either. I was trying to initially. So I was on MDI, right? So I was doing the MDI and that was failing. Obviously, I was bolusing on MDI and then I moved to Android APS and I was trying to bolus on that. And I just found that whether I bolused or not, I was getting similar results and I didn't get the roller coasters.
Yeah,
I didn't bolus. The loop always brings the plane into land, right? Without exception. Right?
But do you think your body's helping? Your body's still making some insulin 100%. And it definitely is helping. And where taking MDI was just a nightmare because you were still making insulin and making it at different times as well. Like that you couldn't tell when it was tired.
Yeah, there'd be all those aspects. 100% I'm still producing insulin. I can't anymore. So before I was taking insulin, I was measuring it and I was either above the normal range of insulin production, but because I'm so resistant, I still had diabetic symptoms. or I was in normal range. But these days, even though because I'm taking insulin, because I've got the insulin pump, it's suppressing my pancreatic function. But there's absolutely still pancreatic function there. So yes, I do not ever represent myself as a type 1. You can be just like me and not bolus. The technology's not quite there yet. It's getting pretty close. So KBMPS will be there in a few years.
I'm more thinking of other people who have LADA and they're trying to manage on MDI and not getting access to even an insulin pump, and how hard that must be.
For me, I was rubbish. I could not do MDI. It just didn't work. I was pre-bolusing, I was bolusing, I was trying a different ratio. I just couldn't keep my levels flat.
It's hard. It's hard in honeymoon with children, like, because they're a bit like that too, where it's a bit like stage 2, where like they still are making some insulin, but not all the time, and trying to manage the insulin with, they still do need insulin, because I remember Johnny only a half a unit would have been enough for a huge bowl of porridge in the morning. He was 6,
right.
And a whole unit would meant that he would have needed 2 breakfasts, and he needed more than a half a unit, but he needed less than a unit, and
That's hard.
It's hot, like a big bowl of porridge too, because he was hungry in the morning. But going into school, he would need a juice and 2 packets of raisins as well, just to get him to break time. And
wow.
And that was where we moved to a pump. And I'm just thinking about how hard it must be for those that have LADA and maybe moving, like you, where you noticed that you needed to go on insulin and having to go on MDI and not having a choice about an insulin pump. Sorry, Tony, I interjected there, but that's just really fascinating, and access to technology and stuff. That is,
the pumps are subsidised in Australia, but the CGMs, it's only recently that CGMs have been subsidised. But yeah, now it's all.
Was it easy enough for you to get access to an insulin pump?
Yeah, you have to do it under private health insurance here.
Okay.
So it's not part of the public system.
Yeah. Okay.
So if it's purely public system, then you're looking at injections, and all the needles are free effectively, and that's all subsidised. But if you need a pump, you need private health insurance.
Okay.
And then it's 100% covered.
Okay.
But most people in Australia do have some level of private health insurance. And once you start earning over a certain amount, they encourage, basically, there's a tax advantage in Australia to having private health insurance. So most people have some level of private health insurance in Australia. We're not quite the UK system in that regard. I'm not sure how the UK is these days, but we've got a public system. But yeah, we sort of, in some ways, are heading towards the US system, which I'm not happy about. But that's for another day. We can rail against the Australian public health system.
I feel like we're all transitioning into different levels at different stages, and nobody's happy.
No.
Yeah.
Just before we move on to the next section, I had another quick question just on the sort of subsidised model and that sort of thing, because you'd mentioned that before you were fully insulin dependent, you were on things like Ozempic, which, because they were considered under the healthcare model to be a type 2 drug, you couldn't get subsidised. So how has CGMs been put on the subsidised list? How does that work for someone who has LADA?
Yeah, so if you're type 1 in Australia, you get subsidised CGM. So you pay like $30, so that'll be about £15 for a box of sensors, and the transmitters are free, and that's run through a parallel scheme called the NDSS, which is National Diabetes. I don't know what the S's are, but it's a subscription scheme or something, or something like this. But basically, every person with diabetes in Australia registers with the NDSS, and then those subsidies are managed through that process effectively. So if you're scheduled, if you register, and then on your card, on your account, they say what things you're allowed to get subsidised, and the government covers the rest. So type 1s get covered for CGMs, type 2s don't. But then drugs are handled differently. Drugs are handled through basically the medical approvals, which you'd have a similar process in the UK about drug approvals and which drugs are used for which conditions, etc. So that's handled through that. But yeah, but I've kind of rambled there, but yeah, basically CGMs are managed through a parallel scheme, if you like.
No, that's really, really helpful because, access to tech and just healthcare in general can be such a minefield, and it's handled so differently, not just around the world, but even just within certain countries. It can be different region to region. And we often talk about things like the sort of postcode lottery around these types of things.
Yeah, we don't have the postcode lottery here. We're very rural, we have very large rural areas in Australia. So I imagine access in those areas would be harder for a lot of this stuff. I live in Sydney, which is the largest city in Australia. So I'm very privileged in that I've got access to a lot of things. But literally, I just go up the hill from my house. There's a chemist there. I go to the chemist. I show them my NDSS card. I say, I'd like to order these things, please. And then in a day or two, it arrives. And whether that's insulin, whether that's like pump and sensor technology, that's literally the process. And then I pay, anywhere between sort of $10 a box up to $30, $35 a box, and just half those numbers, and that's what it is in pounds. So £5 up to say 15, 20 pounds, depending on the item. But it's actually really easy in Australia to get that tech once you've registered and once you're on all those things. What's crazy, one thing that is crazy, is when I first got diagnosed, I registered with the NDSS and they said, just put down that you're insulin dependent because it's just easier. Right? It's just, otherwise it's a bureaucratic minefield. So, and you can go to the NDSS website and you can say, show me all type 1, how many type 1s in Australia, and it will show you all the type 1s and it will show you where they are. But officially there's no type 1 who are insulin independent under the NDSS, even though I literally was a type 1 who was insulin independent for 5 years. Because everyone just registers as insulin dependent, because otherwise they don't get access to things like CGMs, they don't get access to the subsidised test strips and all the rest of it. So everyone registers. So there's absolutely no stats in Australia on the number of LADAs, how many people are insulin independent. All that stats have been lost because there's sort of the bureaucracy of the system.
It's so interesting to see how people's need to access this tech and sort of impact of the bureaucracy of the system, and it sort of robs you of that information.
Yeah, it's a shame. It's a shame because I think LADAs, for a variety of reasons, are quite underrepresented in the research. This is why they sort of still don't know whether we're sort of just stage 2 type 1s or whether we're a distinct disease, because there's not a lot of research on this. And one is we're few and far between. Another reason is because our progression is so slow, research grants would have to be slow as well. They have to go for a long period of time as well, where you can get much quicker results testing, say, a drug on a classic type 1 who's just been diagnosed and going to progress in a few months. That's much more sort of aligned to how grants work than waiting 5 years to see if a LADA responds to teplizumab or whatever drug.
Yeah, that was in the back of my head, Leon, as well, about like when you mentioned that LADA is quite like stage 2, and I understand with stage 2, then if with stage 2 you're insulin independent, that your blood sugars are still all right, but like you haven't, but teplizumab can hold back the disease condition.
Yeah, about 7-8 years. Yeah, by 7-8 years it can hold it back. So this is very much a personal belief. There's no medical evidence to necessarily support this. My personal belief is if I'd gone to teplizumab early, I'd probably would never need insulin. Is my personal belief, and I'll be very clear here. This is just my opinion. Right? There's no research which has proven that by any means. But because we're a slower progressing form, I think a drug like teplizumab would suppress the immune response sufficiently that we could go on for a very, very long time, if not a lifetime.
I believe it because
without the need for insulin.
There's a tweet out from ATTD today saying that I don't know the name of the drug, but it mentioned about preserving beta cell function in this drug. And I can't remember if teplizumab preserves beta cell function, but like the likes of like hyperclozidine, it doesn't preserve beta cell function. I think Roman Hoverk was able to show that it didn't like halt the progression of beta cell deterioration, but maybe I'm wrong about that. But like, it was just something I picked up today on HTT's post. It was like, gosh, that's not just halting it, like it's like helping even more.
Yeah, I've no doubt, but we won't know. We won't know. We will eventually. Right? Eventually, they'll do the LADA research once there's been sufficient evidence and their focus is sort of young type 1s, right? So that's their focus because they know they can get quick results there, and they get the evidence that it can delay by 7-8 years. Eventually, they'll move on to LADAs. Eventually, someone will do the research on LADAs. I did hear of a trial in Australia. I think it was last year, but the results haven't come out yet. So it'd be interesting to see what the results are like. But I believe that new class of drugs, that new immunological treatment drugs, where they're selectively suppressing the immune system, I think it's going to be a sort of a whole new wave of treatments and medications that come out of that. And maybe even something like a vaccine for type 1. I'm very excited about.
There's a lot going on right now. There's a whole lot going on all over the world, and but it is like you say, it's with LADA, because it's so slow to progress, that the studies need to last longer.
We're not academically very interesting because we're just we're few and far between. So it's hard to get a decent cohort, and the grants have to go for years, and that's not easy to get. And there's other research which they can do lots of other research for the same dollar and get a sort of better bang for the buck in some ways. So I respect the decisions. It's just frustrating knowing that there is a drug out there like taflizumab that potentially could have cured me.
But it's not available yet. So like, it's only available.
But it's not available. US. That's right. Yeah. That's right.
So we're like, I know helping like Elsa this week, that is the screening in the UK. Like I'm really comforted by the fact that like there are T1 screening programs now starting to like
that's great.
Balloon everywhere. Like, and I know that they're doing it in children at the start, at least in the UK. And I know that TrialNet was up until your 40s, which was maybe based on historical type 1 stuff, probably. But the likes of LADA, imagine catching that, or at least using that, if that information was transferable from what they learn with those, because that cohort has a slow or a faster time range.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, it's a more aggressive immune response. LADA could be the first type of, again, I'm being hyperbolic and I'm not speaking out of fact, but out of personal opinion. But LADA could be the first form of diabetes that's cured, right? If these drugs are that effective, they could cure LADA. I can't see why. It certainly would delay. It would extend the honeymoon. It would delay onset of insulin dependence, but it could potentially cure it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, indeed. Will I move on, Tony, to the next section? Are you or do you have any more questions in diagnosis piece?
I'm sorry, I've just come back. It's LADA could and has been the first type to be cured. I'm just back, so apologies if I've missed anything there.
No, so we were just talking about like research and about it being a slow range or a longer range, and Leon said not that interesting, but it's really interesting because of that last bit, because there is that potential.
Yeah, the new generation of immune therapy drugs have a lot of opportunity.
How do you know, with all your like, I'm sure you deep dive into this, and you know that there isn't that information in the database in Australia. What's it like elsewhere with LADA for like percentage of adults diagnosed with LADA? Like, is there any data at all Probably
Yeah,
not.
no, there is. There's been some sort of studies out there where they've sort of screened type 2s and type 1s, just to get an idea of how many misdiagnosed, etc.
Yeah.
So in terms of diagnosed LADAs, we're sort of 1% of the 1%. So of the, so type 1s, I think, are 1-2% of the diabetic population.
No, we're
And then
10.
of the-
We're 10. We're like 9, 10.
10%, sorry. I said it was
Yeah.
10% of 10%. Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Free coffee. Okay, cool. So,
That's okay. You're doing
thank
well.
you.
You're doing well.
Right. So LADA's at 10% of the 10%, effectively. So that's where the 1% came. Yeah. So, and they're the diagnosed ones. In terms of undiagnosed, there was one paper I read, I've talked about this on the blog before, where it's believed that it's a sufficient rate of misdiagnosis that LADAs could be a similar population if they were all diagnosed properly to the type 1s. There could be as many LADAs out there that are misdiagnosed as type 2s and,
See, I believe that
as there are
because
as the type 1s.
yeah, because like I was watching one of the as a DDoC voice, like one of the researchers from Exeter talking about how 1 in 4 or 1 in, I think it might be either 20% or 25% of those that have type 2 end up on insulin within 5 years. And if you end up, I'm just listening to your story and thinking like, well, maybe if their autoantibodies aren't checked, then they could have LADA, and they could like many, but they also mentioned as well that for those that end up needing insulin within 5 years, that there are people who don't have the positive antibodies that still should be treated as type 1s as opposed to
it's not, it's if you have the antibodies, you're type 1, right, by definition. But there are type 1s that do not have the antibodies, especially if they come at it, once all their beta cells have been sort of destroyed. The immune response is going to be so low that it may not be detectable. So there are type 1s that don't have the immune response.
And that diagnosis is important for like sort of access to drugs, because when you don't have a type 2 diagnosis, you can't get Ozempic and those kind of things funded. And when you don't have a type 1 diagnosis, you don't have access to the technologies. So that whole diagnosis is a trap.
And the other aspect I haven't mentioned is the relationship with the doctor, right? So if you've been, let's say you've been misdiagnosed as type 2 and you're really type 1, you're fighting a losing battle, right? Your pancreas is going to be getting weaker and weaker. Want a better phrase? You're not going to be able to cover your meals, and the doctor's saying eat better and move more, and you go, well, it's not working, doctor. I'm eating I'm eating healthier and I'm moving more, and the doctor's and we hear this again and again. It's just assumed the patient's lying, the patient's not telling them the truth. And
it doesn't matter what type of diabetes that they have.
Yeah, but I think because doctors feel they're infallible, and it must be the patient that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
Very broad stroke for any doctors listening. I know, very broad stroke. But especially if you're type 2 and you're being misdiagnosed, of course the things you're trying are not going to work, and insulin's inevitable. Right? Anyone who's type 1, insulin is inevitable. It might be years, but it's certainly at this stage, you're going to be using the insulin, and no amount of low GI food is going to fix that.
Yeah, exactly. Just before we move on to the next section, I just want to bring in a couple of comments we've had on the hashtag about this section. So we had a tweet in from Hannah who said, very interesting diabetes chat tonight. I'm LADA on metformin, MDI, and also very insulin resistant. Diagnosed 6.5 years ago. I feel seen. So we've got some people with LADA listening, which is very good. There's a lot of diversity in the types of diabetes people listening. And we also had another tweet in from Gillian, who said that she finds it fascinating how different insulin requirements can be for nominally the same disease. She's also categorized as LADA, type 1 diagnosed in their 50s and insulin sensitive. So all small insulin doses, but without those small doses, go high very quickly. It's a balancing act. So lots of interesting comments coming in tonight. I'm quite conscious of the time, and we haven't had the chance to get onto all of your advocacy work yet. So
Okay.
I don't, if you don't mind, if Mary'd like to move on to the next section, if you've still got time there, Leon, if you're quite happy to continue.
It's 6:30 in the morning. I've got nothing on for at least another 2.5 hours. It's all good.
It's the one perk of this early rise.
Oh well, I'm really interested in this section because for a couple of reasons anyway. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about being a DDoC voice, Leon.
Yeah, absolutely.
And maybe start at the start. How did you hear about DDoC and how did you become a voice? Yeah, start there.
No worries. I'll also talk about DCB because I don't think I mentioned that in my sort of bio to you guys. And DCB is an excellent mob to get involved with as well. But I'll talk about DDoC first, and then if I forget, please remind me to talk about DCB because
start about your DCB. Start about DCB first. Yes, because then I'll remember the other stuff. You talk about that.
Okay. DCB, so diabetes center burn, I think it is. And so DCB are basically an organization that help fund people with ideas for how to treat diabetes. So if you've got an idea, and you literally just have to have an idea, you don't need a product, you don't need a prototype. You've got an idea of, you know what, it would be great if we had something, right? Some device that did this. Or if you've got an idea for an app, they have, every year they run a couple of challenges, one for devices, one for apps. And you put your idea up, you get to do a sort of a presentation to them, so a very quick sort of presentation, and they will fund that idea, and they want no percentage of the IP. They are in it just to throw money at people with good ideas to manage diabetes, right? They're not in it for the IP. So this isn't a Dragon's Den where they say, we'll take 30%. They've got labs, right? They've got diabetes specialists. It's basically, I don't quite know the full story. So if there's DCB people listening, apologies if I misrepresent this. My understanding is it's a son of one of the big pharmaceutical companies, sort of CEOs or C-levels. And he's just sort of created this center to help promote ideas around diabetes. So I had an idea about measuring DKA. So at the moment we measure DKA with ketones. That's an indirect measure because DKA is not a ketone issue. Ketones are produced. It's an insulin issue. There's not enough insulin in the blood, and that turns the blood acidic. So it's a blood acidity issue, and it's an insulin issue more than a ketone issue, right? Because if we're in ketosis, we generate ketones, and it's perfectly
You're talking about root cause, yeah.
Right. That's the root cause is a lack of insulin, and that generates fuels in the blood, and that sends the blood acidic. So I had the idea, is there a pH meter out there that we can use to measure the pH of blood to detect DKA?
Yeah.
Right, and there is. There's a what's called NISPAD sensor, which is a semiconducting sensor, and there was a device out there which was used for food to measure the pH of food for food testing, sushi testing, stuff like this. And so I tried this. I bought one of these devices. It cost me about £100, but I thought, I'll try. And I had to draw blood out of my own arm, so I had to use a butterfly needle and a vacuum toner on myself. To draw the blood out. So I literally jammed a needle into my own arm, but a butterfly needle did the vacuum toner, pulled the blood in, and it works pretty well. And so this is my idea that rather than measure ketones, if we could make this device so that rather than having to pour blood into a vacuum toner, that we could make it so there's a drop of blood like it is with the blood glucose. Then this is a device that any person with type 1 would probably want around, just so they could see if they're heading into DKA or not. And so this was my idea, and I went to DCB, and I got shortlisted in the top 20 because they were focusing on blood glucose technology that year. I didn't get up into the finalists, but I've been with them. I've been engaged with them. I'm now a mentor for the people that come up with other ideas. So as a person with type 1, I get used. So people have an idea and they say, look, Leon is a person with type 1. It's just a good idea. An MBA. So from a business perspective, I can give some advice about how the product can work from a business perspective. And obviously, as we mentioned, I've got a sort of a physics and technical background in my day job, so I can sort of assist on that. So I'm a mentor now for DCB, and that's not a paid position. I just emailed them and said, I really loved the experience with what you did with the competition. Can I help in any way? And they said, look, if you could be a mentor to other people that are going through the competition, that'd be great. I'd love to. So yeah, DCB, fantastic organizer. If you have any idea for an app, any idea for managing diabetes, look them up and get involved in their competitions.
Just found the
there's nothing that there's nothing nefarious about them. They're not there to steal ideas, steal IP. They're there to fund people. They've come to me outside of the competition, even though I said I didn't make the finals. I made top 10. I didn't make finals. They come to me and said, if you ever need funding to get these sensors, or if you need email us and we'll see what we can do. Right. So they're very much there to promote the management, promote ideas around helping the management of diabetes, making technology friendly for people with diabetes.
Gosh, that's
so fantastic organization. That's DCB. Yeah, wonderful people.
Okay, so I've just shared
then I got onto because of DDoC. So DDoC got me in touch with the DCB people. So DDoC, and I can't actually remember how I started with DDoC. I got involved. There's a couple of characters in Australia which are sort of some of the big hitters of advocacy in Australia. So Renza Shabilla's one. Dave Burren is a huge looping expert. So they're probably the two characters that are coming to mind when I say that. So Dave Burren was the first person with type 1 that I ever met. It was 11 months from diagnosis before I met another person with type 1 face to face, and it was Dave Burren. I had no idea who he was. I just went to a sort of a looping meetup, just so I could learn about looping, even though I was insulin dependent. I say, I'm just here because I want to learn about this stuff. And so I'm just sitting there with Dave Burren. So I've known Dave Burren for 5-6 years. Renza Shabilla I met along the way, who's a huge diabetes advocate. But she's got a fantastic blog. I'm going to misrepresent it now, and she's going to smack me when I next see her. Diabetogenic, or it's got.
Diabetogenic?
I'll leave it. Yeah, that's the one. Thank you.
Can I even say it right?
But anyway, so I got involved with them, and through them, I think they talked about DDoC. And so what DDoC is it's an organization that sends people with diabetes into these medical conferences. So conferences like ATTD, EASD, these kinds of conferences. So they can promote what's being discovered, so they can tweet and Instagram or whatever else, and just get information from these conferences out into the real world. Mm-hmm. And they basically you apply, you say, look, this is my advocacy work, this is the kind of stuff I do. Can I please go to the first one I went in flesh was Barcelona. So I said, can I go to Barcelona and go to the conference and I'll do those things. And if they say yes, then they pay for your flight, they pay for your accommodation, and you get to go to these conferences. They also have virtual positions. So a lot of these conferences now run in hybrid. So a lot of the conferences I'll go to, because every time I go to this conference, I've got to take annual leave. I've got to take leave from my work. I can only do so much of that a year. So often I'll attend these conferences virtually and do the same activity. I'll still be tweeting, I'll still be doing it, but I'll just attend virtually and learn about the information. And it's great for me because I'm learning about the latest technologies in diabetes, which is fantastic, but it's also getting information out there so others can know the kinds of stuff that's coming, the kind of technologies that are coming. So people should, if you're interested in, if you're doing advocacy work, whether it be blogging, whether it's sort of running groups or whatever, and you're interested in attending these conferences, which are normally closed to only medical professionals, DDoC is a great conduit to getting into the conferences. And again, they're fantastic people. They're
the
all
applications are open for till the end of the month. I'm just going to share
please.
The link for people because I need to do that myself. So what have you learned though from being? So you did talk about like kind of you gain from it as well. What have you learned from DDoC, like yourself?
So when I was in honeymoon, it was those conferences where I learned about the incretin mimetics of the DPP-4 inhibitors, GLP-1 agonists, and sort of the latest drugs that were coming out. And so when I say I was being treated with those drugs when I was in honeymoon, it was me attending these conferences, then going to PubMed, finding the papers, finding the evidence that they preserve beta cell mass, and then going to my endocrinologist and saying, look, here's a paper where it says this drug can help me, all right, to preserve my beta mass. Can you prescribe that for me, please? And then the endo would go off. In the case of the early, it was I think it was saxagliptin, which I think it was a pill from memory. They went off and they said, look, that paper's great. There's this other paper over here with a same class of drug, a bigger cohort of people that they tried it on with a similar effect. So let's put you on that one instead, because that's a more reliable study. I went, yeah, sure, no worries.
But it's the breadcrumbs, isn't it? Like that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the conference led me to the ideas which then led me to the papers, which led me to get my treatment. So it's absolutely, it's directly fed into the way I've managed my honeymoon.
And where did your blog come in? Your diabetes advocacy blog come in then with, like, was that pre-DDoc or when did you start writing that blog?
Yeah, I should look it up. I can't remember exactly when, but it would have been, I imagine, in the first, say, 6 months of being diagnosed. So it's well before DDoc. And as I say, I do sort of advocacy work with the software that I work with, which is what's called Microsoft Dynamics and Microsoft Power Platform. They're the software products that I work with.
I love Microsoft. We don't have Microsoft CRM. I'm a real Microsoft nerd. I love Loop.
Oh yeah. But yeah, so I've blogged about those products for years. So bringing that learning of how to be an advocate for software into the sort of the type 1 world wasn't too much of a stretch. So, yeah, so I started writing the blog, and just about stuff that interested me. And blogs are good because they help, for me anyway, sort of help me get my thoughts collected or my thoughts together about a subject. So if I've got to talk about it, then I've got to get my thoughts right.
Yeah, the best way to.
So I've always found blogs useful for that.
Because you're like, the best way to learn something is to teach it to somebody else.
Yeah, it's something like it. Yeah, it's exactly right. So I started writing the blog. So yeah, I started the blog, and I started the Type 1 meetup, which you mentioned in the introduction, right? So these things happened pre-DDoc. So I started the monthly meetup because I hadn't met anyone for 11 months until I met Dave Barr, and I thought, this is insane. There's got to be other Type 1s out there. So I started a group and just thought, I'll start it. And if people turn up, fantastic. If they don't, so be it. And then, people were turning up, and post-COVID, it's dropped off a lot.
That helps you share the information that you've gained from, like, going to conferences.
So the format I had for my meetups, I'm speaking past tense, I'll explain that in a second, is I'd have a guest speaker along. So often I'd go to local events where they'd have someone from Dexcom or someone from Medtronic or whatever company it was. And I said, look, I've run a monthly meetup. Do you want to come along and talk about how great your pump is? And generally they're sales reps, and I go, yeah, hell yeah. So they would come along as a guest speaker and sort of talk about, the Dexcom sensors, or it's about Libre, or it's about Medtronic pumps, or whatever it was. So every month I'd have that. But yeah, when I started doing the DDoc, then there was the opportunity. I did occasionally present at my own meetup on some of the stuff that I found. I did one a few months ago where I had a meetup, and I was talking about DDoc and sort of what I'd learned at ATTD this year at Berlin, and some of the more interesting technology that's coming out. We're getting close to a non-invasive glucose sensor. We're getting close to that now. I think it'll be a few more years, but we're getting close. But what I found post-COVID is I'm not getting anywhere near the attendance that I used to. So I used to get consistently a dozen people coming to the sort of the physical meetup. But that's dropped right off. So I'm thinking of now turning it into a Type 1 cycling club. So one of the things Type 1s, if I'm right, fear about doing exercises, they'll hypo and it can be dangerous, etc. So I'm thinking of starting a cycling club where we pair people up. So we all go on the same course, we pair people up, so people have got a buddy with them while they're cycling. So we tell them what they need to carry on the bike in terms of hypo snacks, etc. And I can see that having a lot of benefit. I can see that having a lot of benefit. So I'm still sort of in the works of transitioning to that, because I think that'll have more because I'm happy running the meetup, so I'm just not getting a lot of attendance these days. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe it's time to shift gears and
There's
and
lots
do
of
something
positives
slightly
in
different.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we all need more exercise in our lives. Yeah, I don't think.
Yeah, and you do
anyone,
like it's a bit like
anyone does.
TDFC, like where you're still supporting diabetes, but doing something that with somebody else and getting outside, and there's all good things about it. You mentioned ATTD, Leon, and
yes.
I know that you created a poster at that one. Do you want to tell people about that?
Yeah, so I blogged about. So it's interesting, right? So you get these international consensus papers by the various diabetes organizations. And there'd been one come out for type 2, which basically, so the consensus paper is where clever people doing the research come together and go, you know what, we probably should have an official way to diagnose type 2. That's a good idea, right? And they hadn't had it, right? So a few years ago, the clever people that researched type 2 put out this international consensus saying, here's the flow chart for how you diagnose type 2, and here's the flow chart for how you treat type 2. Okay, fantastic. So we now got that, right? People would think that you've had that for the years, but no, they haven't. There was no official.
Wow.
People were just sort of just trying stuff. And then a year after that, there was one put out for LADA, which was interesting, right? So another group of people got together and say, this is how you diagnose LADA. This is how you treat LADA, and it fed into that type 2 paper. So it said, when you're sort of insulin dependent, then you can use the type 2 treatments, except for in these areas. These are the exceptions because they're dangerous for people with type 1. And I'm specifically referring to sulfonylureas.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a drug called sulfonylureas, which basically stimulate insulin production.
And euglycemic DKA is a problem with those. I think
that might be the SGLT2 inhibitors.
Oh, that's those ones. Yes, sorry, that is.
Yeah, the ones that make you pee. They're the ones that make you pee.
Yes.
The sulfonylureas, the salts, stimulate pancreatic production. And what's been shown in other papers is that's fine for type 2s, but if you're a type 1 in honeymoon, it actually shortens your honeymoon. It runs out your pancreas quicker. So type 1 LADA should never be on sulfonylureas because it'll destroy the pancreas, literally.
That's interesting.
But yeah, there's the SGLT2s which are really interesting because they direct glucose into the urine, right? They make you pee out your glucose. But for type 1s, it can be problematic because of the DKA, the eDKA. So you get a DKA response. So your blood sugar is going acidic, but there's no high blood glucose. So sometimes it's hard for the hospitals to realize what's happening.
I understand. So tell us about your poster at ATT.
Yes, sorry. Yes, I think where was I? That's right. I was talking about the poster. Right. So so there's so one came up for type 2, one came out for LADA, and then a year later one came out for type 1. So again, there was no definitive way no official. These are the steps you follow to diagnose type 1 until a few years ago. Which is it's madness. Right? You think, I know the doctors are all across this. No, they're not. And so there's pretty flow charts. And so I had this, on my blog, I had this idea of, well, there's a type 1, there's a LADA, there's a type 2. Why don't we bring these together so that if someone just simply presents with symptoms of diabetes, we can follow a flow chart, work out if they're type 2 or if they're LADA or if they're type 1, and then we can have a second flow chart that shows, here's the treatments you follow for the various forms, and because there was inconsistencies between them as well. Because type 1 and LADA, you'd think would mesh, because LADA is a form of type 1, but there was inconsistencies there. So that's what I did. I blogged about it, and then I created a poster. And I'd had a couple of GMTs that night. I remember, and I saw this email saying call for posters because I was on the mailing list because I've been attending virtually as part of DDOT. It said call for posters. Yeah, I went, you know what? I'm just going to submit. Bugger it. Right, I've got no medical background. I'm not a doctor of anything. Doctor of life? No, not even. So I thought, a couple of GMTs down. I thought, I'm going to do this. F this. I'm going to do this. And so I applied, and they accepted. It was ridiculous. They accepted the poster from Tribe Research Institute in Sydney. It was madness. So then I had to create this poster, but that's okay. The DDoc, there's a lot of DDoc people which are sort of semi-academic as well, so they helped me a lot. Put the poster together, make it credible. Because of the physics background, I had created physics posters in my dim dark past about 30 plus years ago.
Yeah.
So that helped. Well, probably 30 years ago. So I put this poster together, and and it's gone to a couple of conferences. It's gone to a couple now. Went to ATDD. It's gone to one in Australia, the diabetes conference in Australia. And it's also, what that's led to is, and it's not quite out yet, so I'm talking ahead here, but basically when I went to the conference in Berlin, I took a copy of this poster and I would doorstop the lecturers, the people presenting. I would doorstop them with the poster saying, look, I've got this idea. I want to write a paper on this now. Are you going to help me? And I was just doorstopping these academics, these researchers, and one of them said yes. And so I'm currently co-writing basically an academic papery version of this poster, which hopefully will be published next month in one of the journals here, and there'll be a fold out of the flowchart which says this ain't diagnosed diabetes. So there's going to be a fold out flow. So I'm a centerfold in a magazine.
I love it, Leon. I think it's really brilliant.
It's the first time I've ever been a centerfold. I'm quite proud.
Did you coerce them with like a T-shirt with their picture on it?
There was that as well. In this case, it wasn't. For this particular person, it wasn't. But yeah, so it's going to get published. Hopefully, fingers crossed, published next month. And then in this particular journal, this magazine, it's sort of magazine, half journal, goes out to all the endocrinologists. So all the endocrinologists will now have this definitive flowchart of all three, to diagnose with kind of diabetes. Yeah, so every time I go to this conference, I get a T-shirt printed of one of the academics who I rate from their Twitter. So it's just a Twitter photo, and then I get a photo taken with them. So I've done that with Professor Chantal Mathieu, and his name escapes me. But
did you do Pratik as well?
Pratik, no? Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, it was Pratik that I did. Yes.
I giggled when I saw
Pratik children. Yeah. So sorry, Pratik.
I love that. I love that.
6:30 in the morning. And then I got both of them. So then Pratik he put one of the T-shirts on, and then I got a photo with both of them, which was fantastic.
I love that. I loved when I saw that. I'm really aware at time, and I want to talk to you about the Etsy shop too, and your insulin writing pens and all those bits, because that's where the crack is.
It's fun. Yeah.
Tell us about it.
Okay, so when I started on my diabetes journey, I had to take metformin, which are these great big hunking pills. They're giant. They're massive bloody pills. They're like the bullets are like an inch long, massive bullets. And you have to, it's like that. And you got to take them with food. And I don't always eat at home. Sometimes, heaven forbid, I go out and I'll socialise with people, or the family will go out and have a meal.
How dare you?
Yeah, that's right. How audacious. And then so I've got to carry these pills, because if you take them outside a meal, they cause you a lot of mischief, shall we say? Gastrointestinal issues, I think, is probably the polite way to put it.
Yeah.
So you got to take it with food, and so I needed a pill box. I needed some way to contain these, and I went to the chemist, went to the pharmacy, and there were just these sterile plastic boxes. So I'm like, that's rubbish. I don't want a sterile plastic box. I want something a bit more interesting. And so I thought, I wonder if I could convert a pocket watch. And so I obtained a pocket watch online from a wholesale supplier. So these aren't old pocket watches. These are contemporary pocket watches, which look old, but they're contemporary. They're digital. And I said the watch part. And sure enough, the body worked well. I was carrying my pills, and I thought, you know what? I imagine there's other people that don't enjoy their pill box. And the site where I get the pocket watches from, they had fun kiddie ones. They had like Sailor Moon, if you know anime, like little Sailor Moon pink, sparkly pocket watches and all sorts. I thought for kids, right, for type 1 kids, or for kids that need to take pills of any sort, it doesn't even have to be diabetes. This is a bit of fun, right? This is something they could take to school, and if they've got a bit of stigma around having to take pills, they can have this, and it's a bit of fun. It's this is my Sailor Moon necklace or whatever. And so I started my Etsy shop. So I started an Etsy shop. I put a dozen different sort of pill boxes which I like the look of, or pocket watches I like the look of. And that went reasonably well. And there are sort of a dozen that are still on there. And then when I started using the insulin pens, I was like, what if I could convert these to a pen? Just to a writing pen. I thought, I'll see what I can do. And it took a fair bit of tinkering, but I managed to convert them into pens. So I've done the same thing. I've now put the pens up there. And initially it was the ones that I get prescribed, right? It was initially the ones that I get, because I still have a prescription for pens, even though I'm on a pump, just in case, right? The pump dies, and I still need pens. So I've got all these pens with expiring insulin. I thought, I'll see if I can convert them. So originally it was the Levemir and the NovaRapid pens, or Novolog in America. But now I've expanded it. Now I've sort of can do it's the ones I can only do the ones from which are of that same company. I've forgotten who does the NovaRapids now.
So that's Novo Nordisk.
Novo Nordisk, of course it is.
Yeah.
So at the moment I can only do Novo Nordisk pens. So the Ozempic pens I can do because that's Novo Nordisk. Saxenda, so those big chunkier sort of fatter pens, I can do those. And the more slim sort of NovaRapid, etc.
I've shared the writing pens, like so. Do you want to call out your shop name? Yeah,
it's called Pocket Watch Pillbox because it started out, as I say, with the pillboxes, but it does the pens now. I'm hoping to expand into other types of pens, but some of the manufacturers literally glue the pens together, so it's quite hard. Whereas Novo Nordisk, you just have to really pull hard to take them apart. You just pull very, very hard, and you can get them apart. And so that's friendlier.
I think they're fab. I think they really are fab.
Thank you.
I'll let Tony come back in. And is there anything else you want to add first on any of those things we've been talking about, Leon, that I've forgotten to mention, or?
I think we've covered the full gamut. But if you're interested in traveling internationally and going to conferences and living a fabulous lifestyle, then by all means go to DiabetesChat. They'll just fly you to these places. They fly you and they come in, and as long as you've got some history of advocacy of some kind and you're happy to go to these conferences and tweet, then that's it. That's all they ask.
I've just thought of a question. Have you attended virtually or just in person?
Both.
Right,
so initially I was attending virtually, and then when I got that poster, they sent me to Barcelona.
Tell me the differences then. So I've just attended virtually and as a DDoC voice, and it's like how do you prepare differently for those, or like because I know when I attended virtually it was like I was just trying to watch everything. What about you?
It's
because you've more choice.
It is a different experience. So attending virtually, generally in Australia, it's in the middle of the night. You can only attend so much, right? Because it's European time zone normally.
Yeah.
And I've got a day job, so I can only attend so much during the night before I collapse from lack of sleep.
Yeah.
So generally, I'll watch some and I'll tweet about some, but I'll be watching them because they're all pre-recorded. They're all recorded. Mm-hmm. So then on the weekend, I'll watch a lot more. I'll watch, and often there'll be talks where it's on the same subject, but it's completely different sort of presenters. But then you can synthesize the information and sort of say, well, this talk was about this talked about this. Therefore, we can conclude, if they're all talking about the latest generation of GLPs or whatever it is, whether they're talking about looping or pumps or whatever, you can sort of bring the talks together and sort of create a bigger picture, create a sort of a meta article on the talks. So that's sort of the virtual experience. The physical experience, you get to meet the other DDoCers, which is a big plus, right? You get to meet face to face these people that you're seeing online that are talking. And they're just wonderful people. The DDoCers are all passionate. They're all about sort of helping the community. They're just awesome human beings. Yeah. And I met one chap who literally had introduced the HbA1c test to Madagascar. I'm just sitting there sort of talking to him at a dinner, and I said, so I was working in Madagascar. What are you doing in Madagascar? Well, they didn't have they couldn't test HbA1c, so I worked with the pharmaceutical companies to get the
Wow.
HbA1c test into Madagascar, so the people with diabetes in Madagascar could work out if, what their HbA. And he's taking insulin there, and there's no refrigeration in some of the places he's going to, so he's literally burying the insulin in the ground and leaving it in the ground for a few months and stuff like.
Wow.
Just amazing stories. These amazing advocates doing amazing work, and you think, oh, all I do is write a blog and make toolboxes, but but it's fabulous to meet them.
But you go to
great experience.
You go to find out more about how your diabetes is, so that you can understand it more about yourself, and then talk about it in your blog, which tells more people about it. And isn't that really what other DDoc voices are really doing as well? Like it all starts very similarly, isn't it? Or to open up awareness about like lack of access to what people need for their diabetes treatments and care and wider society too.
Yeah, you certainly I go to the talks which are of interest to me personally, right? So if there's a talk on LADA, there rarely is. It's very rarely a talk on LADA, but if there's a talk on LADA, I'll obviously attend a talk on LADA. If there's a talk on looping, I'll attend a talk on looping. But there's still plenty of time at those conferences when you're attending physically. Certainly, there's plenty of time to go to other things. So I've been to talks where they've talked about type 2, where they talk about and I kind of blogged about this. That basically, so when a person with type 2 gets the lap band surgery, in many cases, their insulin requirements disappear overnight. So if they're insulin independent type 2, and they get the lap band surgery, the fat's still on their body. They've still got the visceral fat. They've still got the fat on their body, but they've no longer got type 2 in some sense. They've gone into remission, right? So what's happening there? Right. So it's seeing these talks where they say it's not that obesity leads to type 2. There's something else happening here, because the person is still obese. The person is still, even though they've just had the lap band surgery, and yes, that weight will go. The type 2 diabetes is being affected immediately. It's something to do with the gut, right? The only thing that they've changed in the bariatric surgery is they've removed the gut, or they've suppressed the gut in some fashion, right? So clearly there's something else at play. So seeing those talks where I'm not type 2, it doesn't really relate to me, but it's just really interesting to see those kind of talks. So whether you're attending virtually or in person, you get to do that. But yeah, it's there's lots of scope to sort of get a better appreciation of the sort of full spectrum of diabetes, and get ideas as well from some of those other areas of research. So other areas of research, and what, I can make use of that.
Yeah, because otherwise we only know our own diabetes. And I know in my house there's 2 of us here, and our diabetes is very different. And we both have type 1, and Johnny's 13 and I'm 44, I think. I don't think I'm 45 yet. But it's very different.
Yes.
And so like if I didn't that's what I think I've learned from myself, is a greater appreciation of other types and our type elsewhere as well. Yeah.
And people have a variety of ways. What's fabulous about diabetes in general, but and my experience has been in the type 1, is different people manage it in very different ways. So some people are low carbers, some people are carnivores, some people are vegetarians, some people are looping, some people are MDI. But by getting sort of that exposure, it's hard to get exposure, I think, unless you have meetups or unless you're sort of attending conferences like this to sort of see people in action, seeing how they're managing their disease. But there's such a variety of ways that people manage type 1 and manage it effectively and manage it fabulously, even though they're doing completely the opposite thing to what you're doing, perhaps.
Yeah, that moves really nicely into the last little bit. Like if we've time, Tony, like to talk about peer support and mental health and those kind of things, or is it? What do you think? We're 10:05?
Yeah, go for it. I think we should just take it home with a nice peer support section, just to chat about the Sydney Type 1 social meetup, if that's all right, Leon.
Yeah, and I've sort of touched it already that I started this group. I hadn't met anyone for 11 months with type 1 at all. Then I met David Burrow and the Bionic Wookie. And I thought, so I thought, this is crazy. There's this, we're going to, there's got to be other type ones out there that want to meet other people that want to sort of just have the experience, right, of eating a meal, and if your pump goes, if you get beeps on your CGM, that other people understand what that means, and they don't care if you inject at the table and all the rest of it, right? So so I started this meetup, and the format was we'd get a guest speaker along. They would sort of do a bit of a talk, and I'd normally run it at work, right? It was either at work or wherever I could get sort of a space for free. I'd run it as a sort of a meeting, a work meeting. And then we'd go for dinner afterwards. So we'd go for a meal afterwards, because generally after the guest speaker and sort of you're chatting for an hour or two, people are starting to get a bit low in the evening. Yeah. So we'd go for a meal. And that's what I ran for each month. As I say, post COVID, it's gone a bit quiet. So I'm thinking of now converting it to a type 1 cycling group. Because I enjoy cycling. I've done cycling in the past, and keen to get back into it. But I can also see benefit. I think there's a lot of hesitancy about doing something like cycling, even though it's quite a gentle exercise. It's quite easy to get into. There's just this sort of fear of the hypo and all the rest of it. So I'm thinking of converting into that. But I learned so much. Every meetup I went to, I was learning. I literally took a notebook and I was just scribbling down about looping, about what people were doing, what people were eating, what foods. If they go to the local supermarket, you should buy this food. It's really good. It's low carb. Blah blah blah. All sorts of information.
Were there any other peer support groups that you would have attended to other than just the Sydney one, or like that you did yourself? Like, was there anything with like Diabetes Australia to meet other people? I'm kind of thinking of like your misdiagnosis and like this whole big topic of stigma and like not having access to treatment that would benefit you, but that you had to pay for, like the likes of Ozempic. And what was that like in conversations and peer support? Or did you guys talk about that?
Yeah, so in terms of Diabetes Australia and the various state diabetes groups, they don't really organise any kind of peer support. I think it's a big gap in what we do in Australia. So I know, so there's a state called Victoria, which is further down. That's where Melbourne is. I understand they had a mentoring program for a while, where when you were diagnosed, you get sort of attached to a mentor, someone who's sort of had the disease for a period of time, and they could sort of help you out with tips and tricks. But I'm not sure if that's continued on. It was very much state based. So there's nothing like that for me in New South Wales. Where I got my peer support was primarily in those first 11 months before I met anyone, was online groups. Online groups is what sort of, for want of a better phrase, kept me sane, right? So things like the OzDoc, so the Twitter chats that were going on. So like GBDoc, right? So those kinds of things. So the kind of things like GBDoc, OzDoc. There was the American one. So there's Twitter chats, Facebook groups. So there's those
DSMA,
social.
Wasn't it DSMA in the States? Yeah.
Yeah, those ones, right? So that's where I was getting my sort of social interaction and talking. And some of those are really good. Some of them are really toxic. So I was on Reddit for a while, and I found Reddit just incredibly toxic. So people would say type 1s always need insulin, and I go, actually, I'm a LADA. I'm honeymoon. I'll be honeymooning potentially for years, and they'll kind of dismiss me as if I wasn't real type 1. So it wasn't particularly affirming or supportive. So you just get rid of those, right? It's like your healthcare professionals. If they're not working for you, if they're not serving your needs, you get rid of them and get no one. You're not there to please them. You're not there to make them happy. And so same for me for social groups, right? The social groups that are toxic, get rid of them. The ones which provide you information that you can use, which are supportive, they're the ones you want to hang around. You don't need that extra garbage in your life.
No, diabetes is hard. It's hard enough, isn't it?
Yeah, you don't need to have sort of toxic bloody social media nonsense as well on top of it.
People just don't understand properly. They only know their own.
Yeah. So so that was a social media. In terms of piss, that's why I created the meetup, because there really was nothing like it in Sydney, and yeah,
Well done.
there was the only one, and yeah, incredibly helpful. If
And there's
so much good information comes from other people with type 1.
and it's, so from starting with online support groups to creating an in-person meetup, and I'm moving this to like an evolution of that, like to it has to suit you too. So if it is cycling and you love cycling, then and it works, and even if it only works for like 4 people, then you'll still get a load out of it yourself. But
I haven't cycled for a little while. I've done sort of 60-mile cycle for charity, right? Cycles in the past. When I was a lot more active. I haven't been active with cycling for a few years now, but I'm keen to get back into it. I need to do more exercise, right? We all do.
yeah,
and so it's a good way. But yeah, if I only get half a dozen people, that's okay. I'm still regularly exercising, so it's serving my needs. But if I can encourage other people and make it safe, if I can find a format which is safe for the type 1s, so they're not fearful they're going to hypo and fall off the bike or whatever else, then hopefully that's useful. That could be used elsewhere. That might be a benefit. It'll be benefit to the individuals, but I think it can be beneficial if a sort of a template can be created.
most people just don't want to be on their own when they're like, that's all. Yeah. And yeah, that's and the difference between online support and in-person support, especially when you know them online and then you see them in person, it's just magic.
Yeah, it's great. It's great meeting the people over in Europe. Bastian Hauk, who runs DDoc, such a passionate individual. Just meeting him in person first time, which was this year actually. So the first time I met him was this year at Berlin. So it was fantastic just meeting Bastian face to face, and so many others. There's Mara, and there's so many others. Which just going from online and following their instas to meeting them in the flesh and seeing they're everything I hoped and more in terms of being the passionate, just fabulous individuals they are.
Oh, like you talk about it so positively. Maybe will we move in? What we do now, Tony? You're in charge. I'm just a gabmouth. Tony's in charge, Leon. You see, I just talk.
Okay. No, wow, yeah, I've been doing a little bit of that tonight as well, or this morning.
Is it dead weird, like kind of talking when it's nighttime here? And have I been talking about nighttime? Or have we been talking about nighttime more like making it all sound weird?
No, it's all good. It's all good. I'm used to attending sort of, even in the software world, I'm attending conferences in the US and stuff. So I'm used to bouncing around time zones.
That's hard to do, like when you're in Australia to match in with like the US, isn't it? Or is it not, like with Sydney? Is it okay?
Oh, no, we're used to it because we live, what we say, the arse end of the world.
Literally,
we're used to sort of accommodate Americans, especially Americans. Again, a broad stroke. Apologies to all Americans listening. Are really poor at accommodating other people's time zones. So generally, you've got to accommodate theirs. And so we're used to it.
Are the UK?
UK are better. UK are better. And you can normally. It's like this, right? So it's the end of your day. It's the start of our day. So that matches up pretty well.
Okay.
The US, it can be harder.
Yeah. All right. Okay. I understand. So Tony, are you back? Are you able to talk again, or?
Yeah, sorry, you guys have just been sounding so robotic for me the last little section, which is a bit frustrating. But I just wanted to sort of round up before we move into our open forum section where people can chat whatever they like. Leon, if you'd like to chat about, I don't know if I've covered all of this, but maybe a nice neat little package altogether, all the different places that we can find you online, your blog, your Etsy shop and everywhere else. Yeah,
okay. So my blog is practicaldiabetic.com. Which seemed like a good name at the time, so I've stuck with it. So you can look there on the blog. I try and blog at least every few weeks. I've got And if you want to blog, a great thing to do is create like a Word document or a notepad of just topics as they come to you. I've got a backlog of topics to write about, so it's plenty. It's a case of carving out time to do it. So yeah, practicaldiabetic.com. On Twitter, I am practicaldeeb, I think it is. Or you can look up Leon Tribe and that, because I've got 2 Twitter accounts. I've got Leon Tribe, which is Instagram as practical_diabetic. You'll find me on there. That's more sort of crazy insects of Sydney, cocktails, and when I go to conferences, sort of the social aspects of the D-Doc conferences. And then the Etsy shop is Pocket Watch Pillbox, all one word, where you can get pillboxes which look like pocket watches, and you can get disposable insulin pens which have been converted into writing pens. And I think that's it. I think that's, then occasionally I sleep.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Leon, for taking the time to join us. It's been an absolutely fascinating chat. So I can't thank you enough for your time and answering all the questions.
Oh, no worries at all. No, it's been good fun. Thank you.
I hope you have a great day ahead. Simon.
Thanks, Leon.
No, thank you. I'll hang around if that's okay.
Yeah.